A few sentences into his Oval Office remarks on August 22nd, President Donald Trump pivoted from FIFA to policing. Chicago's a mess. We'll straighten that one out probably next, he said, signaling that Los Angeles and Washington, D.C. may be only the first stops in a broader federal crackdown that could send troops into Democratic-led cities. In the days since, the clash has intensified, part legal chess match, part political brawl, and part real-time stress test of long-standing guardrails on using the US military at home. On Saturday and Sunday, the Washington Post reported that the Pentagon has been planning for weeks to deploy at least a few thousand National Guard troops to Chicago as early as September, with active duty options discussed but considered less likely. The same reporting noted more than 2,200 Guard members already operating in Washington under an evolving mission that the Pentagon now permits to carry firearms. Chicago's top officials bristled. Mayor Brandon Johnson said the city has grave concerns about any unlawful deployment, adding that the federal approach is uncoordinated, uncalled for, and unsound. His office emphasized that Chicago has not received formal notification of any plan and that local crime is down sharply year over year. Chicago.gov, Illinois, Governor J.B. Pritzker issued a formal statement the next day. There is no emergency that warrants the President of the United States federalizing the Illinois National Guard or sending active duty military within our own borders. The White House isn't just looking north. After Maryland Governor Wes Moore publicly invited Trump to walk Baltimore's streets and see progress for himself, the president fired back on social media that Baltimore must clean up this crime disaster and threatened to send troops and even revisit federal rebuilding funds for the collapsed Key Bridge. Moore responded on television and in a public letter with statistics showing homicides down statewide and in Baltimore, calling any D.C.-style deployment unconstitutional. As rhetoric escalated, so did the visible posture on the ground in Washington. The Associated Press confirmed that some National Guard units deployed in D.C. have begun carrying firearms, an explicit step up from earlier rules that left most troops unarmed. To understand what's happening, it helps to start with the law. For nearly a century and a half, the Posse Comitatus Act has barred federal troops from performing civilian law enforcement functions unless Congress or the Constitution expressly authorizes it. The main exception is the Insurrection Act, which lets a president deploy forces in limited circumstances, typically to suppress insurrection or enforce federal law when courts cannot. Washington, D.C. is a special case. The president already controls the D.C. National Guard, and Title 32 arrangements can place Guard units from other states in the district with the consent of those governors. By contrast, deploying Guard forces into a state without the governor's consent generally requires federalizing them under Title 10 and, practically speaking, invoking the Insurrection Act, moves that are legally permissible in narrow cases but politically explosive. That's why statements like Pritzker's matter. He's drawing a bright line around consent. When the governor says there is no emergency, he is signaling that Illinois neither seeks nor accepts federal troops. If the White House wants Guard units on Chicago streets anyway, it would have to navigate the Insurrection Act's exacting criteria or craft a lawful alternative mission that avoids direct law enforcement roles, often by framing troops as protecting federal property or supporting federal agents rather than policing residents. Recent litigation out of California over a June deployment, 4,000 members of the California National Guard and 700 active duty Marines to Los Angeles shows how quickly such missions attract court scrutiny. A district judge initially found aspects violated Posse Comitatus. The Ninth Circuit later paused that ruling, and the case remains unresolved. That Los Angeles operation is also a preview of the political terrain. California's leaders argued the deployment lacked consent and risked militarizing public safety. The administration countered that troops were protecting federal personnel and assets while ICE expanded operations targeting undocumented immigrants. The Chicago plan, according to the Pentagon planning described by the Post, appears to follow a similar template, combining a Guard presence with intensified federal enforcement by ICE and challenges to sanctuary policies. The scale, at least a few thousand Guard members, would make it one of the largest domestic military footprints in a U.S. city in years outside of disaster relief. Even before Chicago, the country has watched the district become a test bed. The Post reported more than 2,200 Guard troops in D.C. from the local Guard and 6 other states. The Pentagon then authorized some to carry firearms. Those two facts together underscore how quickly a mission can evolve from presence to armed presence, a shift that changes the atmosphere for residents as surely as it changes legal risk for the government. T. The counter-argument from Democratic leaders is straightforward. There is no emergency. Johnson's office points to statistics: homicides down more than 30% and shootings down almost 40% year over year. The mayor's press office also says robberies are down 35% and warns that an unlawful deployment would be unsustainable and would threaten to undermine the historic progress we have made. The Washington Post likewise notes declines in violence since pandemic spikes, even while acknowledging Chicago still has the most homicides by raw count among US cities. In media interviews Sunday, House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries aligned squarely with Pritzker. There's no basis, no authority for Donald Trump to drop federal troops into the city of Chicago, he said on CNN, accusing the president of manufacturing a crisis to distract from unpopularity. Senator Tammy Duckworth called the plan deeply disturbing and un-American. Trump, for his part, insists the public is demanding action and that the visible federal presence in D.C. is already delivering results. In remarks captured by Roll Call's transcript, he declared, "We had 0 murders in the last week since we've done this," and warned he would take D.C. over with the federal government and run it like it's supposed to be run. His Baltimore message was similarly blunt. "Clean up this crime disaster," he posted, while threatening to send troops and revisit infrastructure funds, comments that prompted bipartisan criticism in Maryland and a pledge from Moore that he would not authorize the state's guard for crime control. Beyond politics, the legal mechanics will likely determine what happens next. CRS's nonpartisan primer on domestic military authorities highlights the basic structure. Posse comitatus limits are real, exceptions exist, and presidents have occasionally relied on the Insurrection Act to deploy forces when state processes break down. But Brennan Center analysts warn that today's statutory text leaves large grey zones, allowing wide executive discretion that courts have rarely tested in modern contexts. That's why civil society groups and some lawmakers are again urging Congress to clarify thresholds, require formal presidential findings, and create time limits and reporting requirements if the Insurrection Act is invoked. Congress.gov Brennan Center for Justice. In practical terms, watch 4 tracks. First, the on-the-ground posture in Washington. The AP confirmation that some Guard units are now armed is a measurable escalation. If some units shift from visibility to joint patrols or crowd management, the legal stakes and public reaction will both rise. Second, the Chicago timetable. The Post's reporting suggests operational planning that anticipates an early September start if approved. That window gives Illinois officials time to pre-file challenges and seek temporary restraining orders if federalization under Title X appears imminent. It also gives DOJ and DOD time to refine mission scope to stay on firmer legal ground, e.g. protecting federal facilities and augmenting federal agents rather than policing city residents directly. Third, the litigation pipeline. California's still unresolved case over the Los Angeles deployment is the most advanced test. A definitive appellate ruling that narrows or affirms what support roles troops can play without violating posse comitatus would shape options in other cities. Expect Illinois, Chicago, and civil rights groups to reference that docket heavily. Fourth, the politics, and especially the optics. Governors Pritzker and Moore are advancing a narrative of state sovereignty, local progress, and constitutional restraint. Jeffries is teeing up a House messaging fight over manufactured crisis. Johnson is offering a metric-driven rebuttal. In the past year alone, we have reduced homicides by more than 30%, shootings by almost 40%. The more those claims are borne out by independent data, the harder it becomes to establish the kind of impracticability required to invoke the Insurrection Act over a state's objections.